You're listening to Drug Positive, the risk reduction and benefit enhancement podcast, reducing shame and stigma to save lives and end the drug war.
He gave me probably 100 milligrams. So I went outside and sat for a while and went through the initial rush, that strange feeling that we all fall in love with after a while. And what it did was it opened me up to who and what I was. And it gave me compassion for myself. I realized that I was a treasure and I was of value. And I felt as if I were held in the hands of God with infinite love.
This is part 2 of the early secret history of MDMA, and that was Anne Shulgin describing her first MDMA experience. Anne is the widow of Sasha Shulgin, the chemist credited with rediscovering MDMA in 1976, and the clip is an excerpt from my upcoming documentary, MDMA the Movie. We'll hear more from that interview later in the episode, as well as a clip from my interview with Matthew Baggett, neuroscientist and MDMA researcher, who discusses the 1950s U.S. Army study at Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland, part of the sordid Cold War program called MKULTRA, where they dosed American citizens with psychoactive drugs against their will. These drugs included mescaline, MDA, and possibly, but nobody knows for sure, MDMA. In part 1, we learned that the birthplace of recreational MDMA was actually in the Midwest, the Chicago and Detroit areas, and that underground chemists were producing it as early as 1970. We have no idea who these chemists were, nor how much they made, nor who might have taken it back then. The only reason we know any of this at all is because we have DEA records of seized MDMA from these underground labs at the time. Of course, the official history of MDMA places the first human consumption of the drug sometime around 1976, after Sasha is said to have produced it in his home laboratory. We now know this isn't true because people must have taken it in the Midwest in the early 70s, but what we can say is that everybody who we know of today who has taken MDMA can be traced back to the godfather of ecstasy, Sasha Shulgin, who, even if he wasn't the first person to take it, was the person who got the ball and the rest of the world rolling, as they say. But there's always been a mystery. I've been going to gatherings at the Shulgins now on and off for 20 years, and it's always been known and discussed there that Sasha didn't come up with the idea of adding a methyl group to MDA. Someone else did and suggested it to him. People always said this was a UC Berkeley student, but nobody could remember who it was. Even the old-timers who were around when it happened. Even Sasha himself couldn't remember. Who was this student who suggested to Sasha that he make the methylated version of MDA? And how did they know about it? Maybe they were a subject in the MKULTRA study, some speculated. It was always a missing piece of MDMA's history. Well, guess what, everyone? I found the person. And believe it or not, I wasn't even looking. His name is Carl Resnick, and he's a friend of mine. In 1975, he was a student in a class at UC Berkeley that Sasha was teaching on forensic chemistry, and he's the one who suggested to Sasha that they make MDMA. They made the first batch of it, in fact, together in 1975, a full year before Sasha claimed he made it. Did Sasha forget about Carl and this first batch of MDMA? Or was there a reason he never told anyone about it? We'll learn the answer to that question in this episode because we speak to Carl himself, who tells us the full story. It should also be pointed out that Sasha wrote about Carl in his first book, P-Call. In the book, Sasha changed the names of real people, and Carl is the character nicknamed Klaus, who Sasha claims told him that his stutter went away when he was on MDMA. Carl, however, says that's not true. His stutter did not go away when he took MDMA. So Sasha definitely remembered that Carl took MDMA, but yet never mentioned in the book or to anyone that he was the person who suggested first that they make it, and even that they made it together. What's going on here? After speaking with Carl, I think I know, but I'll leave it for you to decide after listening to the interview. This is part 2 of the secret history of MDMA, And not only do we speak with the person who first suggested to Sasha Shulgin that he make the drug, but we speak to the first person we know of ever to take MDMA in 1975. Now, that's a big deal, everyone, and you learned it first right here on Drug Positive, coming up in a moment. But now, here's Tatiana.
Hello.
Hey, Tatiana.
Hi.
How's it going? Did you sleep last night?
Not much. About 3.5 hours. Not enough, but...
And why were you up all night?
Well, I'm on my way to Burning Man, getting everything packed up.
What time do you think you're going to be out of here?
I think I'm going to be packing all day. Yeah, and then I'm going to go to Reno this evening and spend the night there and then get out to the playa. I mean, I padded a lot of extra time into my schedule to help myself make it on time because everything's always up to the last minute, but it still feels last minute.
Right. Well, thank you for taking this time to chat with me about the episode. You might not be on the next episode because I'm going to be cranking that out and then following you to Burning Man 2 days later.
But we can do some audio out there too.
Yeah. Afterwards, we'll have a Burning Man, Drugs at Burning Man episode. That'll be controversial, huh?
Yeah.
A lot of Burning Man reps don't like to talk about the fact that there's drug use that goes on. But I mean, come on.
It's a sensitive issue because they have a relationship with the feds. But, they finally have harm reduction out there. It took a while to get Zendo out there. I guess there's no official dance safe drug testing.
Dance safe is still not allowed to have a presence at Burning Man doing drug testing. We also know that they're out there busting people constantly. Usually that's for cannabis.
Yeah, we've been getting some special announcements, email announcements about enhanced traffic stops that are happening right now.
Yeah, right. So even though cannabis is now legal, recreational cannabis is legal in Nevada, Burning Man takes place on BLM land that's overseen by the federal government. And so they're out there busting people. And what they'll do is just give you a ginormous ticket of $600 and then kick you out. It's just total racket. It's just a way for them to make money.
Well, they also make you unpack your entire load and repack it. And for me, that would take all day. I would just be by the side of the road.
Right. Make sure you check that car because they bring dogs around and then you will suffer.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, I will see you out there in a couple days.
Yep. I'll see what I can get built by then. So I really love that quote from Anne that you start this show with.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful when she says, I realized I was a treasure. That was a piece that stood out for me. So I put it on a piece of art.
I know, it's beautiful. And you actually gave a copy to Anne, huh?
Yeah, I did a portrait of her face with that quote. And it was my experimentation with printmaking, which is tough for me. So I ended up just going to oil paint and covering it. And so it's a cool combo of the two.
Yeah, Anne is wonderful. Our interview with Anne and Sasha was just inspiring. It was the final interview with Sasha. He passed away a little over a month later. And during the interview, he wasn't able to speak well. He had a stroke about a year earlier. So Anne does most of the talking. But we are going to listen to a clip coming up from that interview. And you will get to hear Sasha's voice ever briefly.
Yeah, he had some nice smiles, though, during the interview. And Sasha will be a part of this story today. Sasha's
a big part of this story today. We're going to maybe learn some things about Sasha that we haven't known.
And some new questions.
Exactly. Well, got some bad news. Last weekend, there was a fatality in Oregon at the Brit Festival in Jacksonville, Oregon. All we know at this point is that the person had taken what they thought was MDA, SAS or sassafras. Toxicology tests haven't come back yet. 2 other people that took the same batch of SAS also got sickened. Supposedly, the person was seizing for 45 minutes before help arrived.
So there's still no report on toxicology or?
No, the results haven't come back yet. We're waiting on that. It's just got reported yesterday.
Well, that's really sad.
Yeah. So, in the news also, we have the Loop, a harm reduction organization in England that is warning about N-ethylpentalone. And, that's becoming very prevalent here in the United States as well. It seems like these cathinones or bath salts kind of come and go. It was methylone for a while that was appearing, and now there's a new one, N-ethylpentalone. Much more toxic than MDMA, causing a lot of problems. And so there's a recent article that the Loop found it at a festival in Leeds. Do you want to read a little bit from that?
This is from a site called Leeds Live. So it says festival goers are being warned about a dangerous drug that is being missold as MDMA. Music fans at other UK festivals who thought they had bought MDMA have ended up with a stimulant called anethylpentalone, which is 3 times as powerful.
So this is great work the Loop is doing. They actually bring GCMS machines out into the field, and not only are they able to detect what drugs are in it, but they can tell people the strength of their drugs too. And these warnings are really important. Though, I really don't like the way they say that N-ethylpentalone is 3 times as powerful as MDMA. I think that gives people the wrong impression that the drug works the same way and it's just a stronger version of MDMA.
Yeah, there are all kinds of really horrible side effects listed in this article, and euphoria, a short-lived euphoria at the beginning may seem similar to MDMA, but then there's all these other horrific things going on and people can't sleep for 36 hours.
There's a lot of horrible reports from N-ethylpentalone. It's in the cathinone class of drugs, also called bath salts, and these drugs are primarily broad-based monoamine reuptake inhibitors, meaning they work on not just serotonin, but dopamine and norepinephrine. Norepinephrine's responsible for increased blood pressure and heart rate. I like to call them dirty stimulants. And so without really describing all of this in the article, they sort of leave the reader with the impression that, this drug is similar to MDMA and just 3 times stronger, which might lead people to seek it out.
Sure.
So maybe we should tell people about our new podcast we're starting, which is going to be on our Patreon, where we analyze the news in this way and debunk a lot of the falsehoods and sheer idiocy.
We're calling it Drug Nonsense.
Drug Nonsense.
Yeah, because it's a lot of nonsense in the media about drugs.
It'll be our parallel podcast to Drug Positive, primarily for subscribers on our Patreon coming up. But we're going to publish one as a bonus episode to whet your appetite. Well, so should we get to the interview?
Don't forget the risk reduction tip.
Oh, that's right. I always forget that. Risk reduction tip. What should it be this time? Oh, I know one. This is a really important one, actually. I know that I tell a lot of people this. When you're taking LSD, don't answer your cell phone. In fact, turn it off. And the reason is LSD and other similar psychedelics are what they call non-specific psychic amplifiers. So if you were to get really bad news, say a friend or family member died, something really horrible happened, it might be traumatic. It might throw you into a bad trip, and you're certainly not in a state of mind to deal with it at that moment. So when you take LSD, you should kind of make a cocoon around yourself and your friends. You go and you have a journey or a trip, and you don't want to get bad news during that time. We're so connected to our cell phones anyway, constantly on social media. When you do a psychedelic, take some time off from that. You'll really benefit from it.
Yeah, and even an interaction that might seem mundane could be very awkward when you're on LSD. It could throw you into some kind of head spinny situation.
Right. Okay, so now let's get to the interview, yeah?
All right.
Okay. Oh, I should also mention that for clarity and time, I edited out about 90% of Carl's pretty severe stutter.
You guys are going to love this interview.
Carl, first of all, it's great to be here in your studio. This is going to be the most well-produced podcast that I've done. We're in Carl's sound studio here. Mm-hmm. He's a musician, composer. We got these really high-tech microphones. This is the first real studio podcast we're doing, so thank you for letting us do this here.
You're welcome.
I was introduced to you by our mutual friend Judith when I invited her up to Grass Valley to take MDMA with a group of friends and she tells me that she first took MDMA in 1975, and I said, no, you didn't. Sasha didn't make it until 1976, and she was like, no, we did it in 75. I can introduce you to my friend who did it. He knew Sasha, and that of course was you.
Right.
And you confirmed what she said, which kind of has changed MDMA's history. Mm-hmm. So why don't you start by telling people, who you are, how you knew Sasha, and, of course, you have a role in Sasha's book.
Okay. Well, I mean, my first interest in drugs, I think I was maybe the summer after 7th grade. I read this book called The Drug Experience, which was this anthology of well-known authors writing about their experiences with drugs, like De Quincey and Baudelaire and William Burroughs. Mm-hmm. I was this impressionable kid, and I read this, and I just went, wow, I want to do that. And especially I want to do LSD.
Mm-hmm. Pretty normal route. That was my route too, having read some of the 60s authors and seeking out LSD.
This was like probably around 1966. And being a kid, I had absolutely no contacts. I actually went and bought some packs of Morning Glory seeds and ate them, and they had absolutely no effect.
Right. I tried smoking banana peels, too, and that didn't do anything either.
Let's see, and then by 9th grade, I was smoking pot and taking LSD and been having a good time.
Yeah, like a healthy adolescent.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I think also around 9th grade, I read an article in this magazine called Look Magazine, which was like Life magazine, and it was all about drug dealers and drug chemists and drug busts. And I read that article and I went, I want to make drugs. And so when I was in high school, I went to the UC Berkeley chemistry library on weekends, and I looked up LSD synthesis, and it was like totally beyond me. I had no idea how to do it, but I kept learning more and more about it.
You grew up here in Berkeley?
Oakland, actually.
Oakland, yeah. So that was the center of LSD at the time.
Absolutely, yeah. So I got into UC Berkeley, and I started taking various science classes, but I didn't really want to be a chemistry major. I didn't want to only do that. I was also interested in the life sciences. I was interested in how psychoactive drugs work, so I took all kinds of biology. So I read all these journal articles. Man, I remember reading this one journal article that was about structure-activity relationships among the one-ring psychotomimetics, which is what they called psychedelics in those days.
Oh, it's psychomimetics or something like that.
Psychotomimetics.
Psychotomimetics.
Right. All of those phenethylamine-type drugs that were known then, mescaline, MDA, TMA, etc. So I looked at the authors, and one of the authors both lived like 10 miles from me and was not associated with an institution and lived on a street with his name. And I was going, that's really odd. Who is this person?
Do you remember his name?
Yes, Shulgin.
Oh, it was Sasha?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
And so I filed that piece of information away, and then one day when I was a junior at Berkeley, I was looking at the spring course catalog, and there was a forensic toxicology class, and the instructor's name was A. Shulgin. And I'm going, I wonder if that's the same person. And I went the first day, and sure enough, it was.
Interesting. Well, I should tell the audience here, that there was always this mystery because people had talked about a student at UC Berkeley that suggested it to him,
right?
But nobody could remember who that student was. In fact, many people thought it was a woman, but the name kind of always seemed to slip people. It was like this missing piece of MDMA's history.
Right.
And after hearing your story, I realized, well, not only is it you, but I understand now why Sasha kind of kept it secret, because he didn't make it in his home lab.
Right.
So why don't you continue with your story?
Well, I took the toxicology class, and I absolutely loved it. I absolutely loved him. And I was the only person in the class who didn't want to work at a police lab. And I made it obvious to him that I knew who he was and that I had taken a lot of these compounds. And so we hit it off. So then I asked him at the end of class if I could do some research with him.
More specifically, make some drugs with him.
well, I was open and he was open. Yeah. At that time, he was consulting with the criminalistics department in the School of Criminology at UC Berkeley. Which was the auspices that this toxicology class was under. And he suggested that why don't we say we're doing street synthesis of illegal drugs and we could test for impurities and thereby
get away with it.
Well, show how a drug was actually made, and that would be useful in court, and this would be a way that it
Or you could get away with making it in the UC
Right,
Berkeley
right,
laboratory
right.
without raising
Right,
suspicions,
right.
right? In fact, you told me earlier that was kind of part of what the course was about. The students may have actually done that as part of the course in order to investigate precursors and contaminants to trace where the drugs, how they're made, etc.
Actually, no, not in that class, but there actually was a grad student already doing that in the department.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I mean, officially.
Right.
And so he got me lab space in the basement of the Life Sciences building, which is where the criminalistics labs were.
Right.
Yeah.
And did you, when you first brought up this idea of doing research with him, did you mention MDMA specifically? Or I don't know if people call it MDMA, but adding a methyl group to MDA at that time?
Not at that time. I mean, we talked about what would be interesting, and he asked me to come up with something I thought was interesting. And that was really the first thing I thought about, because I was very experienced with MDA already. And I kind of went, well, since methamphetamine is more euphoric than amphetamine, what would N-methyl MDA be like?
Yeah, right. Very intuitive of you.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I did a literature search, and the only thing I could find was the classified Edgewood Arsenal papers about MDMA that really didn't talk specifically about its effect.
Right. According to Matthew Baggett, an MDMA researcher, he says they didn't get around to testing it on humans. Mm-hmm. They tested MDA and accidentally overdosed someone and they died. And so Matthew thinks they stopped that line of research. So no one in Edgewood Arsenal during those MKULTRA studies actually took MDMA. Mm-hmm. So you found that, and you said, well, they didn't really learn much about that. You never found the Merck patent.
Well, I mean, I think I knew that it had already been, obviously it had already been made because Edgewood Arsenal had it.
Yeah.
So I didn't know exactly when it had been.
Right.
I might have found the Merck, I'm not sure.
How would you find that back then? There's no internet, you know. We're talking about 1914 and in a foreign language.
Well, even at that time, there was like chem abstracts. I mean, I don't know if it was available on a computer then, but definitely you would go to the chemistry library and there would be these huge volumes of chem abstracts, which would have summaries of every chemistry paper ever written, indexed by year and subject and chemical name.
Right. All right. So what was Sasha's reaction? Do you remember when you suggested, why don't we try methylating MDA? What did he say in response to that?
He thought it was a fine idea.
Had he heard of this drug before? Do you recall him saying?
If he did, he didn't let on. I mean, and that's the other thing is that I was always very careful around him, because it was like I knew that he took drugs and he knew that I took drugs, but it was kind of like, let's not really talk about that, you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
Student and teacher.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in retrospect I wish I'd asked him, but I was just, I didn't want to pry, you know, and I didn't want to jeopardize our relationship.
Right. Okay, so you're made in the Life Sciences building under the auspices of producing it as part of the class. Did you actually have to, sign out the precursors? Did UC Berkeley know that you were making MDMA in particular?
No.
Okay.
No.
It's just they were there. They weren't controlled. You just had access to them.
Yeah. I forget whether he had the isosafrole or was already there, but at that time, it's not hard to get isosafrole.
Mm-hmm. How long did it take?
An afternoon.
You did the whole thing in an afternoon?
Oh, yeah. As far as organic chemistry goes, it's not that hard of a reaction. If you have the reagents, it's like upper division organic chemistry. It's not like grad school stuff. Yeah.
And how much did you make?
I don't remember exactly. It wasn't a huge amount. I do remember one of my favorite part of the process is at the end when you have this flask, and it wasn't that big of a glass, maybe about the size of your water bottle there.
Okay.
And it had the freebase, the oil, and man, you would bubble in HCl gas, and these white crystals would fall down to the bottom like snow, and that was just that was so awesome. That was,
that was the MDMA, the final crystals falling down. Huh?
Yeah.
Interesting. So he didn't take it then?
I assumed that he would have. It wasn't until you and I talked in the last year, Ben, I went back and read his lab notes, which were online, and he does not mention until 76. And
right.
And I always thought he must have tried that batch at the time, so I'm astonished that he didn't, but he didn't.
Yeah. Maybe he didn't know.
Right.
Anne also says that he never got the experience most people get from MDMA. So maybe he did and it didn't work for him. And he just,
maybe.
I wonder whatever made Sasha understand, hey, this is a powerful substance to end up giving it to Leo's F if it never worked on him. Could have been from your report because he gave some to you and then you reported back to him what it felt like. Yeah. So tell me about that. So, this is the great coincidence here. Like you did it with my friend Judith.
Right.
You were dating at the time. Right. And so, what did you tell her? Like, hey, here's a new drug. You want to do a new drug with me? I made it.
Well, I mean, we had already taken LSD together many times and MDA a few times. I mean, and this was the 70s in Berkeley. I mean, things were wild.
Right. Right. And tell me about that first experience. So and how much did you take? And how did Sasha know how much to give you?
Well, that's the mystery.
Ah.
I mean, I can only assume he was basing it on MDA.
Right.
But he gave me 2 little vials of 125 milligram.
Okay, you got the original dose that ended up that today is the therapeutic standard dose. Yeah. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. I remember it was Bay Area late summer, like September, which is like the most beautiful time in the Bay Area. And we took it in San Francisco and got on a ferry boat to Sausalito. And it was a really nice ride.
So did you, was your suspicion that it might be more euphoric than MDA confirmed immediately?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the most puzzling thing about it was that there were no visuals. I mean, I'd never had anything that felt that, quote, psychedelic and had 0 visuals.
Right. So then how soon after that did you report back to Sasha?
Within a week or 2. Yeah.
And did you ask him for more?
No.
So going back to that professor, saying, hey, can you give me some more of that
MDMA? Yeah.
So then you read...
I mean, I definitely took MDA after that a few times.
You had access to that?
Yeah. I mean, that was everywhere.
Yeah. Did you then have no contact with Sasha until you read P-Call and found that he had wrote about you?
I ran into him at a psychedelics conference in San Francisco in 79, but after that, no, not until the early 90s when P-Call came out and I read his description of me and I'm just going, oh, this is wrong. This is not what happened.
Hey, what name? I forgot. What name did he use for you?
Klaus.
Klaus, right.
Yeah.
Right. So he had the first letter, correct? And got the L in there.
Yeah. I mean, almost everybody I knew from UCSF was in that book, and all the names were like just changed enough that you knew who it was, but it wasn't the exact same name.
Right. So he said that you reported to him that while on MDMA, your stutter went away. And you told me that was completely false.
Right. Yeah, right. So, I mean, I had some speech therapy around that time that helped temporarily, and I think he conflated that.
You remember you talked to him about that?
Yeah.
Or maybe he was just fibbing because he wanted to promote
perhaps,
his legacy.
Yeah.
And you say you eventually called him and you confronted him with this error. What did he say in response?
Well, I mean, he apologized and said, I meant no harm, and I'm sorry if I misrepresented anything. Yeah.
Well, if he used a fake name, there's you can't sue him.
Right, exactly.
And probably nothing that would be slanderous about that anyway.
Right.
Well, so I am going to introduce this episode. I have introduced this episode by saying you're the first person in history that we know of to take MDMA.
Okay. Well, I'm not making that claim, but I will accept that you are.
We know actually that someone else took it before you, because we know that in 1971 the DEA seized MDMA in some underground laboratory raids. There are records of that, though we have no idea who those chemists were, how much of it they actually made. It's just a reference in some DEA documents. That signifies not only that the real birth of MDMA was in the Midwest, in the Chicago and Detroit area, interestingly also where house music, where electronic music got its beginning. That's probably a coincidence. But also that makes MDMA the first really true designer drug, in the sense that a designer drug is a drug created by tweaking the molecule of an already illegal drug to skirt the law. That's the definition of designer drugs. And MDA had just been banned in 1970, and then in 71 they find MDMA.
But I wonder if they did that for legal reasons, or just because of the same reason I had of making it more euphoric.
Yeah, you don't know. It could have been just to kind of get around the law, or someone else had an idea that, hey, let's attach a methyl group here like people do with amphetamine and get a methylated psychedelic amphetamine. Yeah, it's a big mystery. But, so everyone we know who's taken MDMA, it has been traced back to Sasha's first production of it. We thought it was 76. Now we know it was 75. And then he gave it to Leo Zeff, and Leo Zeff started taking it around. So even though there are these other people that we don't know of in the Midwest, I stand by my characterization. You are the first person we know of ever, you and Judith, who have taken MDMA. And that's a significant part of the history. Also, it was your idea to get Sasha to make it. He may have made it at some point later, but it was your impetus to have him make it when he did. That got the ball rolling. Yeah, I wonder how much of this history is interesting to anyone other than, psychonaut geeks like us. But, a drug that really changed my life. I'm very interested in all the nitty-gritty details, and I'm really happy Judith introduced me to you. I know I'm interviewing you right now. We'll see. Hopefully we'll get people emailing about this episode, telling us, that was sort of really interesting to them too. Carl is a donor to the film too. Thank you very much. And we're still fundraising. People can go to mdmathemovie.com and see our fundraising campaign. Still have a lot of money to raise for post-production. Well, Carl, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And it's
great. Fun,
great being in your studio, and we'll talk again.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
So what did you think of that?
It's such a creative idea, to come up with a new chemical. Like, I never really... And he really changed the world by coming up with that idea.
I think he doesn't realize how much he changed the world. Like I said in the interview, I think Sasha probably would have decided to make it anyway, but Carl played a really important role in this history. And then, what's interesting to me is Sasha didn't take it for another year. They made it together. He gave 2 doses of 125 milligrams to Carl, and then Carl reports back that it was really euphoric. And maybe that's the reason why Sasha never took it, because Sasha was interested more in the visual psychedelics.
But for Sasha to understand that this is an important drug that he needs to share with Leo Zeff and to get out into the world, he must have understood the significance emotionally. Maybe other people tried it?
Well, we don't know of anyone else who tried it.
Someone made Sasha see the importance of this drug.
Yeah, he had a jar of it. After they made it, Sasha kept the jar of it. And so maybe during that year, he let other people try it. From that jar, got report backs, which eventually led him to give it to Leo Zeff. So Carl's a little humble about his role in MDMA's history and being the first person we know of to take it. He was sort of resisting that label.
Yeah, he is a very humble guy for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe no one ever made such a big deal out of it before as we are. Maybe he didn't even notice his role in history.
It's actually true. And, until Judith introduced me to him and I started having these conversations, he hadn't even thought about it in years.
Yeah, it seemed like it took a while to sort of put the pieces together and say, hey, wait a minute, this person we just met, who's a friend of a friend, also is this historical character.
Right. He came up with the idea, you know? So That was a fun interview. And Carl's a friend of ours now. We visit him when we go down to Berkeley. So.
Yeah, he's a great guy. It's good to know him.
All right, well, let's listen to another clip from my interview with Anne and Sasha Shulgin. This is really interesting.
I can't say 100% or 99% of people who take it have this amazing loving experience and the insight, but I would say it's close to 90%.
That first time you did it, you didn't want Sasha's company. After you felt it, did you then seek out his company?
Oh yes, I went inside and told him what had happened. And he explained to me that he didn't quite get that sort of experience himself, but that he realized that most people did.
Did Sasha teach Leo about MDMA?
He didn't teach Leo. He said, Leo, I think this is something that might interest you.
How did he know that it might interest him if he didn't experience the magic himself?
I don't know. There was something about it Sasha is not a psychologist. That's not the area of his expertise, but he knew enough to understand. I think that the insight was an extraordinary thing. The combination of insight with self-acceptance, and that he got, and he felt that Leo would know what to do with it, and Leo did.
It's interesting that Sasha didn't get that experience.
I know, but he's strange in other ways. He doesn't dream in Technicolor, and I do.
He dreams in black and white.
He always dreams in black and white. He says if he gets color in his dreams, he wakes up. So.
Is that true, Sasha?
Can you remember?
No, I don't remember.
He doesn't remember his dreams now.
Did you ever do MDMA together?
Let's see. Did we? No, I can't remember doing MDMA together. But there were other things that he had invented, which we enjoyed exploring.
I'm sure a great many, huh?
Yeah, a great many.
Okay, what did you think of that?
Anne did MDMA on her own for many years. So it was very meaningful for her, important to her, but yet she didn't do it with Sasha.
Isn't that nuts? The love drug, the communication enhancement drug.
Couples therapy drug.
The couples therapy drug. The godfather of MDMA and the goddess of psychedelics never took MDMA together?
Huh.
Kind of nuts. Well, I mean, I think it's because, like she says, Sasha never got the experience that most of us do. He's in that 10% for whom MDMA just simply doesn't trigger the empathy, insight, and self-love.
Well, he had a lot of other drugs to enjoy.
That's true, and he made a lot of them for us. So we're very indebted to Sasha.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are studies that associate the intensity of the MDMA effect with genetic variants in oxytocin expression.
So it's about the quantity of oxytocin or some other,
I think it might be the receptors that receive oxytocin, but we know that there are people with different oxytocin genetic subtypes.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly am the one that has hopeless romantic written all over it.
I just love this archetypal elder couple. I know they weren't always elders, but when I knew them, they were. And I just love this vision of these two going on journeys into psychedelic landscapes together. And
they really are perfect ambassadors for psychedelics, To whatever degree the official history isn't exactly true, in no way detracts from the importance of this beautiful couple and what they've done for the world and how they've promoted the therapeutic uses of psychedelics.
Mm-hmm. And they were both storytellers too, so Sasha was communicating the story of his experience in his life.
Right.
And these drugs, and MDMA in particular.
Right. And PCAL is a really amazing book. You should go out and buy it and read it, or you can read it free online on the arrowhead.org website. The book's called PCAL, P-I-H-K-A-L, which stands for Phenethylamines I Have Known and Loved. And it's the first book in a series. The second one is TCAL, Tryptamines I Have Known and Loved. But in PCAL, the first half was written by Anne, and it's a love story of how she and Sasha met and all of the drugs that they did together, which enhanced their relationship and their love. And the second half is qualitative comments from the research group that Sasha would introduce all of his new inventions to, and then also instructions on how to make the drugs. That's when the DEA raided his home laboratory and took away his license after he published PCAL.
What happened after they took away his license? Did he go to court, or did he regain it? What? I don't know that part of the story.
Yeah, I think he got a fine. He never went to prison or anything, because everything he was doing was perfectly legal, right? In fact, the raid was probably illegal. But, the DEA has the authority to grant licenses, and they didn't like the fact that he just made their job a lot harder. I mean, look at things today. Now there are thousands of psychedelic chemists that are producing all these drugs and inventing even new ones. Like, the genie is now out of the bottle. And if the DEA thought they could ever stop the spread of drugs now, particularly with the dark net and Bitcoin, there's no way that they're going to be able to stop drugs. A drug-free world is a pie-in-the-sky ideal. It's actually not even an ideal. It's only an ideal to people who think that drugs have no benefit in society. But they're not ever going to stop now.
It's a fantasy, though. It's impossible.
Right. So now we have another clip to listen to. This is Matthew Baggett talking about MDA.
I think that the history of MDA is super interesting and relevant because it, in a way, is the first entactogen to be used by people. And it's got an incredible sordid history where, it was used by Project MKULTRA and given to people without their awareness. And, they killed somebody by giving high doses of MDA. And so there's a really interesting history there. And it's part of that history that makes me suspect that MDMA was never used in humans in Edgewood Arsenal's experiments. The military was looking at a lot of different substances, both to use as chemical warfare agents, but also trying to understand how they could protect their own soldiers from chemical warfare agents. And they looked at a lot of different derivatives of mescaline, including MDA and MDMA. And in November of 1952, they sent MDA and several other drugs to the New York Psychiatric Institute. And the New York Psychiatric Institute had a contract to study the effects of these drugs in people, both healthy people and psychiatric patients. And what they did was they gave it to somebody without telling them that they were in an experiment. And this person was a prominent professional tennis player named Harold Blower. And he came in because he was feeling depressed, and so he checked himself in. He had gotten divorced and was feeling bad. And in addition to the normal talk therapy treatment, they started injecting him with different psychedelics. And he didn't like it. And so he started saying, I really don't want this stuff. But they continued to give it to him approximately once a week. And so they gave, I think it was 450 milligrams of MDA, and it killed him. And then they hushed up the whole thing. They got the records sealed and things like this. And so it only came out in a series of lawsuits. Because this person had died, they then said, we need to understand the toxicity of these substances better. And so they got the University of Michigan to do a series of toxicity studies. And this got declassified in '69 and published in the '70s. And it's some of the first published research on MDMA's effects in animals. And so one of the reasons that I think that MDMA was probably not given at Edgewood Arsenal is that if you look at the drugs that they sent to New York Psychiatric Institute, they've all got these code numbers like EA 1298. And MDMA's code number is a much higher number. And so it seems to me that they had this death and then they started worrying about covering it up before they got around to looking at MDMA.
That's a really tragic story.
Yeah,
with the tennis player.
Yeah, leave it to the United States government to take these beautiful substances and weaponize them.
They tried to, yeah. In the end, psychedelics weren't really useful as weapons, I guess, although the government didn't actually end up...
No, I think they were looking for interrogation drugs, truth serums, or what I like to call torture drugs. And I think they ended up settling on sodium pentothal. It's more likely to solicit truthful statements when you're being interrogated and tortured. Psychedelics don't actually do that. Mm-hmm. Thank goodness.
Yeah. So isn't it a common belief that MDMA was used in MKUltra?
Yeah, so, we think it was used in MKUltra, but according to Matthew, it just was never used on a person. And I'm really glad of that personally. I would hate it if the first person to ever take MDMA in history was injected with it against their will, right? That would just be a sordid part of MDMA's history. I'm kind of glad that no humans took it in 1953 during MKUltra. Yeah, so, we've gotten some feedback from people that they want us to put a dot at the end of our show. They don't want us just to end.
I've been giving you that feedback, too.
Well, you're a podcast listener, so you know that. So we have to come up with some, closing statement. Okay, ready, everyone? We're going to finish the podcast now.
Oh, like some kind of tagline? Or...
Yeah. You have just listened to Drug Positive.
Let's see.
I don't think it's that important that it's the same. I think it's just, we need to tell people who are... people are listening to their podcast and they're kind of doing their work during the day or they're exercising or whatever, right. And they just suddenly our voices end and then they're like, what happened?
No,
and
you're describing my own experience.
Yeah, no, I know. That's why we just need to be able to tell people, okay, it's over now. You can move on to the next podcast. So, ready? Should we just do it?
What are we doing?
We're telling people.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, everyone. It's over.
I think just a few notes of music would work.
Okay, here comes the music. Ready? Hey, here comes the music. Goodbye, everyone.